Hello everyone, let's rank Souls games by bosses quality. Oh yeah, just so you know, I will try my very best to be, well, as objective as I can and as possible, okay? Okay, at the last place, I will put Demon Souls. Yeah, I don't think that I will surprise anyone with this one. Okay, so what is the problem with Demon Souls bosses? Well, the answer to that question is very easy. If a boss in this game has more than 3 moves, it's a huge miracle. I remember how on this playthrough against Judicator, I realized that he is literally spamming one move over and over. Sadly, I can show you this footage because I am a dumbass and forgot to press record button because I was terrified of his runback. So you just gotta believe me. But holy fuck, he just kept swinging his sword over and over. I hit him once in his sword belly, and Liz kept going for 2 minutes straight until he died. Fuck it, even Penetrator, who many people call second best boss in this game, on my first playthrough did nothing besides his spin move, and once a year he tried to stab me with his Penetrator hit. Other bosses are no better. Most of these bosses are just a puzzle bosses and not actual boss fights. The only exceptions are Man-Eaters, which is kinda debatable. Alan, who is probably the most interesting boss in this game, simply because he's just a regular boss who fights you like a normal boss. Maybe Penetrator if he doesn't spam his spin move. Others are just a fun answer to this very obvious puzzle and you will demolish them. Outside of Alant, all other bosses just straight up spam you with 1 or 2 at best moves. And unless you figure out their gimmick, you won't kill them. But if you figure out their gimmick, they are just unreasonably easy. Like, holy fuck. It's so easy to kill them when you figure out what was the solution of this puzzle. So yeah, because of their very poor moveset and very dumb IE, I'll put them at number 7 spot. Now Dark Souls 1. Before you say something, let's name interesting bosses from Dark Souls 1. Manus, maybe Artorias, and that's kinda it. No, really, just accept it. Dark Souls 1 bosses besides DLC bosses are just a punching bags who you can just first try even with one hand. Yes, Dark Souls 1 bosses have a unique features. Yes, they are memorable. Yes, they have interesting design or story, but that won't change the fact that besides Manus and maybe Artorias, boss fight wise are very boring. It's either just running a circle against them over and over. For example, a fight against Onion Smoke is just a run around pillar, run around pillar, run around pillar, hit them once or twice, repeat until they die. Or you just take big shield and straight up face tank them until they die. When it comes to their moveset, situation is no better. Not only they are slow as fuck besides DLC bosses, main game bosses have 4 at best move, which they just spam over and over. The best example of this without a doubt is Nito, who just non-stop spams his AoE Miasma hit. Once again, yeah, these bosses are memorable. Yeah, these bosses have some interesting feature, for example, DPS check, emotional damage, parkour, footsteps and other stuff. But as a bosses, they all besides 2 or 3 of them at best are very bad. Why I put them above than demons? Well, simply because of DLC bosses, mainly because of Manus and because of Gwyn. And now the most interesting part of my video, Bloodborne and Dark Souls 2. With these games the situation is very funny in a strange way. Both of these games have a shitload, like a shitload of bad bosses, but at the same time they also have many good and fun bosses. And let's talk about this a bit more in detail. Okay, let's start with Dark Souls 2 bosses. In Dark Souls 2 most bosses are just straight up dog shit, or just multiple basic mobs with health bar. And besides ruined sentinels, others just have zero justifying. While bosses like Miltha, Giant Lord, Nachka, Demon of Song and others are just meh. Also, most boss fights in this game are just stupidly easy because Dark Souls 2 has a broken level up system, and because of that your encounter with most bosses is ruined, simply simply because you are just way the fuck over level than them. I'll give you the best example. Let's take a Velstad. He's one of the most interesting and probably third best main game boss of Dark Souls 2, but you can accidentally be over level than him and just straight up demolish him. The best example, look what this dude did to poor Velstad with just 2 hits. That's not a reasonable amount of damage from 2 regular R1 hit. The main problem of Dark Souls 2 bosses is not the fact that they have low amount of health or that they have poor moveset. No, it's the fact that you, as a playable character, are way too over level for them. In Dark Souls 2, while killed all bosses including DLC bosses, was level 150 or maybe a bit above. While in Elden Ring, which is a huge ass boring open world game, I finished it at level 120. Big fucking yikes. Okay, now about bosses. Despite the fact that Dark Souls 2 has many joke bosses, at the same time Dark Souls 2 also has many very good bosses with interesting moveset. For example, 4 main bosses from DLC, Smelter Demon, Pursuer, Darklooker, Velstad, they all are pretty fun bosses. And bosses like Ruin Sentinels, Elana, Looking Glass Knight and Throne Defenders are okay bosses. Also, I never understood and will never understand people who unironically say that Dark Souls 1 bosses are better than Dark Souls 2 bosses because somehow they are weaker / easier, while in reality all Dark Souls 1 bosses besides Manus are just a punching bags and as a bosses they are objectively weaker and less interesting than for example Velstad from Dark Souls 2. Not to mention more interesting bosses like Darklooker, Fume Knight or Sir Alone. People hating on Dark Souls 2 bosses have to at least try to not be hypocrites for more than 2 min and accept that they are not that bad. Now Bloodborne. Well, Bloodborne's situation is even more funnier. If Dark Souls 2 bosses had okay amount of different hits, Bloodborne bosses not only by default have more hits, moveset perspective, they are also much faster than bosses from Dark Souls 2. But the funniest thing is that the Bloodborne bosses are just a joke. Like straight up joke. Bosses in this game are just a pushovers. In Bloodborne, while fighting bosses, you 24/7 have thoughts like, oh shit, he died. I am not joking at all. On my first Bloodborne playthrough, besides German, Logarius and Lawrence, I killed all of them on my first or second try. While my thoughts were, wait, is that it? Is this a joke? How is it over so fast? Am I over level? Or do I have OP runes? Well, sorry if I have OP runes, but in order to get my runes, I had to whoop my own ass in Chalice in order to get them. And not only that, bosses quality-wise are also either very debatable or are straight up trash. I won't name them all. I will simply write which bosses I call debatable and which one trash, because otherwise this video will be 40 min long. Also, there are a few things that most Bloodborne fans refuse to accept or ignore for some reason. Bloodborne bosses can easily be staggered to death. The best example without a doubt are One Reborn, Parl and Ludwig. If you hit them in their very obvious weak point, you can just unlock them to death. For example, Ludwig. Many people 24/7 scream out he is the best boss in Bloodborne, but sorry, I can't call Ludwig the best boss when I can just unlock his entire phase 2 while just mashing R1 button almost non-stop. Weak points are a very bad thing in Bloodborne, on which I even have a full video. The other bad thing about Bloodborne bosses is the fact that almost all of them can just straight up one-shot you. Bloodsucker will his grab attack, Amelia will have wombo combo that microstans you to death, Lawrence will his stomp move in his phase 2, Rom will have meteor rain, Ebrietas will have head slam or will have lasers, Mikolaj will his laser laser beam. Ludwig will his move when he jumps in the air and after 3 seconds he jumps on your head, or will his moonlight charge move. This stupid fire dog can one-shot you with his charge hit, and many more. But also, despite all of that, in Bloodborne there are a few pretty fun interesting bosses. For example, Maria and German, who I gave a spot in my top 10 best Souls bosses, Orphan, Logarius, Cleric Beast, and maybe Father Gascoigne. In length, I want to say this much. Dark Souls 2 by far has more interesting bosses than Bloodborne, but also Bloodborne has more bosses that are more dynamic, cinematic looking, and they have more variety of attacks, especially Maria and German. And I will do a real pro gamer move. I will rank both of them at number 5 and number 4. Now Sekiro. Well, Sekiro bosses is a weird situation. Oh yeah, just so you know, I will talk about only remembrance bosses from both Sekiro and Elden Ring, because otherwise it will be me calling these game devs a victims of incest, and about how much of a cocksuckers are they. Okay, now about remembrance bosses. Despite the fact that Sekiro bosses have a pretty big variety of attacks, there are a few problems about these bosses. First and most obvious is the fact that among 14 remembrance bosses, half of them are the same bosses. 2 Genichiro, 2 monkeys, 2 corrupted monk, and 2 all. And besides all, others are just the same bosses with just one extra move. The remaining bosses are also very debatable. For example, monkeys and the demon can go fuck themselves, while Oniwa and Lady Butterfly are extremely average at best. And also, my huge problem with Sekiro bosses is the fact that because of Sekiro's very repetitive combat system, boss fights besides non-human bosses are just the same. Just hit parry bosses until they die. Yeah, it's more Sekiro's as a playable character's problem, but still, I just can't get rid of the fact that all of fights against humanoid bosses for me are just parry them until they die. Why despite all of that I think that Sekiro bosses deserve number 3 spot? Well, simply because like I said earlier, Sekiro bosses by default have more variety of attacks than other Souls bosses. Well, maybe outside of Cinder and Morgoth. All bosses are very mobile and dynamic looking bosses. Sekiro also has some of my most favorite bosses among all Souls games: Ishin, All Father, Regular, and Inner Genichiro. Sekiro bosses are just almost non-stop concentrated action against a very epic, cinematic, and cool looking bosses. Nearly all Sekiro boss fights are just straight up anime fights, especially a fight with Inner Genichiro or Inner Ishin. But despite that, I can't give Sekiro bosses a higher spot, simply because they are reused over and over with small changes, and because all human bosses just give you the same experience. But also I can't give them lower spots simply because of their insane arsenal of moves. Second place, Elden Ring, and oh boy. Well, if you watch my videos for a while, you know how I feel about Elden Ring bosses. Yeah, if this video was based on my personal feelings, Elden Ring would be at number 5, while I would constantly turbo shit on this game's bosses. Have no doubt about that. But since I said that I will be as objective as I can, I will put Elden Ring bosses at number 2. First, let's start with Elden Ring's bosses problems. First and most obvious is the fact that nearly all main game bosses and especially DLC bosses, despite having pretty big arsenal of moves, these bosses with 90% of their hits are just punching air, while they have one or a few fuck you personally move that just literally one-shots you. For example, Placidusax his double mid-ear penetration, Midra his frenzy flame Avada Kedavra, Mog his nihil, Malenia her waterfall, Consort Radan, and many more. Second problem of Elden Ring bosses is that some of these bosses are constantly running away from you, and half of the fight you are just chasing them almost non-stop. The best examples: Bale, Placidusax, Maliket, Fire Giant, Jory, Astel, and of course Elden Beast. Holy fuck, half? What half? 80% of these boss fights are just me chasing them just to hit them once, twice at best, and then again chase them until they die. high. Also a huge problem with Elden Ring Remembrance bosses, especially DLC ones, is the fact they are way too fast for our main character. So for example, let's take Dark Souls 1. Slow combat and slow bosses, slow main character and slow healing speed. Now Bloodborne. Fast combat and fast bosses, fast main character and fast healing. Meanwhile, Elden Ring bosses and the special DLC bosses are running at you as if you owe them money. Bosses of this game are running at Devil May Cry combat speed, while main character of this game is just unreasonably so and immobile for this game's bosses. And the worst part is that he needs eternity in order to heal. The realization that bosses are not really made for Elden Ring's combat speed for me was while I fought Radan. Consort Radan would fit perfectly as Devil May Cry 5 or Sekiro boss, because in these games main character is either very fast and he has ultimate block with infinity stamina, or is straight up overpowered. And because of such an insane gap between a player and boss's speed, half of these fights are just hit this boss once and then wait for their 10 hit wombo combo and repeat it all until you kill them. You are simply afraid to be a bit active against most bosses, because you know that if you fuck up even once, you might get two shot or straight up one-tapped. I could also talk about their dumb stats and how weapon variety is not existing against these bosses, but it's more Elden Ring's open world and balance problem than bosses problem. Okay, now about good moments. First of all, every single Elden Ring Remembrance boss, especially DLC boss, is very epic visually. Nearly every single Remembrance boss in this game is basically a God's boss fight visually. They all spam you so many anime combos that sometimes they give you epilepsy. Yeah, because of that, sometimes you can see shit, but visually it without a doubt looks very cool. The best example of this are Consort Radan, Mesmer, and of course, Bell. Despite the fact that these bosses will 90% of their hits are punching air, they still have the second biggest arsenal of moves among all Souls games, which is a very good thing. And also a huge reason why I put Elden Ring bosses above Sekiro bosses is the fact that they are more diverse, I would say. A huge plant, some dragons, demigods, some wild animals, knights and other stuff. This game also has a solid amount of high quality bosses, for example, Mesmer, Bale, Godfrey, Relana and Morgoth, and also a few acceptable level quality bosses. So yeah, in 2 words, I will give Elden Ring bosses number 2 spot because of their big arsenal of moves and because of their epic anime effects. And the winner of this video is Dark Souls 2. Big surprise. Okay, so why I think that Dark Souls 3 has the best bosses? Well, first of all, let's start with bad moments. Before Pontiff Sullivan, every single boss besides Abyss Watcher and Gandir are either garbage or very meh. Bosses like Deacons, Crystal Sage, Old Demon, Volnir and others are just meh at best. But at the same time, speaking objectively, Dark Souls 3 has the biggest amount of high quality and interesting bosses among all Souls games. For example, Gael, Free the Nameless King, Abyss Watchers, Bold Gandir, Dragon Slayer, Cinder and many more. Yeah, most Dark Souls 3 bosses don't really have some cool and epic anime effects, but honestly this is not really a bad thing. I will say one thing and many of you might not agree with it for some reason. Dark Souls 3 bosses are very grounded bosses. What I mean by that? Well, let me explain. This game's combat system is on medium speed. It's not as fast as Sekiro or Bloodborne, but also it's not as slow as for example Demon Souls, and the game knows about it perfectly. In Dark Souls 3, unlike unlike Elden Ring, bosses won't run at you as if their ass is on a fire while pushing you nearly 24/7, giving you almost zero time to counter hit them. Yes, there is Fried who is running at Bloodborne boss's speed, but unlike for example Phase 2 Maliket who can one-tap you if you fuck up even once, she does a low amount of damage and she has zero poise, which makes this fight durable. In Dark Souls 3, because you finally play as a character that doesn't die from every homeless fart, you can play aggressively, you can be active in a boss fight, you don't think about something like, oh fuck, if I miss at least one hit I'll get fully one-shotted. And in my opinion that's a very good thing. You aren't just a spectator who is just perma rolling while bosses are spamming with their 10 hit wombo combos. Now let's talk about their moveset. Dark Souls 3 bosses don't have some insane diverse moveset like Elden Ring bosses, but also unlike them, Dark Souls 3 bosses besides one or two of them don't have one outplay button that will full HP one-shot you. If for example against Malenia, you know that you will die only against her waterfall, in a fight against Dark Souls 3 bosses, you can die anytime from any of their hits. In Dark Souls 3, a few bosses also have some cool anime hits, but unlike Elden Ring, in which these anime hits would insta-kill you, they not only look cool, they do a reasonable amount of damage. Dark Souls 3 bosses design-wise are also very interesting. Some knights, humanoid bosses, demons, skeletons, tall lady, dragons, giant and other stuff. Some of you might start bitching about Dark Souls 3 bosses being way too easy compared to Sekiro and Elden Ring bosses, and because of that, for some dumb reason, they should be lower on this list. And first of all, besides these 5 bosses, I don't consider any Souls boss to be hard. And secondly, can any of you who scream at hard boss equals good boss tell me without a random ass argument how a hard boss equals a fun boss? Let's take for example Ancient Dragon from Dark Souls 2. Is he a hard boss? Yes, he is. Is he a fun boss? Absolutely no. Now Maria, is she a hard boss? Absolutely no. I first tried her on my first playthrough. But is she a fun boss? Absolutely yes. So can someone once again explain to me without a random fairy tales how just because Sekiro or Elden Ring bosses, who most of the time are artificially made hard, should be higher on Dark Souls 3 bosses just because they are a bit harder? How exactly does that work? Well, that's pretty much all I want to say. If you like my video, press something under it. With this, I'll say bye bye to you and I'll see you next time.